The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. I got there at 8:47, which was a habit from the 3 years I spent at Amazon, where arriving on time meant you were already behind. The conference room on the 14th floor of the WeWork on Westlake had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Union, and the morning light was doing that thing it does in Seattle in October, gray-pink and almost apologetic, like the sky was sorry for what was about to happen. I didn't know yet that it was about to happen. Marcus was already there. He had that ease about him that I used to think was confidence. He was standing at the window with his coffee, the kind of posture that says I own this room even when it belongs to someone else, and when he turned and saw me he smiled, that wide, practiced smile, and said, "There she is. The woman who built the thing." That was the line he used in every pitch. The woman who built the thing. Like I was a prop he'd found useful. I sat down and opened my laptop. Our CFO, Diane, was across from me, arranging papers. The investors from Meridian Capital, two men I'd met twice, named Paul and Graham, were at the head of the table. And our company's legal counsel, a woman named Sheila Moss from Dorsey and Whitney, was in the corner, which I thought was normal. It wasn't normal. The meeting was supposed to be a term sheet review. Nova Corp, a mid-sized Seattle sauce company, was acquiring Threadline, our startup, the one I'd co-founded with Marcus 18 months ago out of a 2-bedroom apartment on Queen and Ave for $34 million. It was, by any reasonable measure, the outcome you dreamed about when you quit your stable job and stopped sleeping for a year. Marcus said, "Before we get into the term sheet, there's a structural issue we need to address." I said, "What kind of structural issue?" He said, "Your equity position." The room was quiet in a way that felt planned. Sheila opened a folder. She slid a document toward me. It was 3 pages, dense with language I recognized because I had spent enough time with legal documents to know what they were designed to obscure. The short version. Marcus had filed amended articles of incorporation 6 months ago. My co-founder shares, which should have been 34% of the company, had been reclassified as advisory equity, subject to a different vesting schedule, a different liquidation preference, and, in the event of an acquisition, subject to board discretion for payout. He'd done it while I was in Austin for 2 weeks running our implementation with a healthcare client. He had board discretion. He was the board. At the $34 million valuation, my original stake was worth approximately $11.5 million. Under the amended structure, the board, Marcus, would determine my payout. The document Sheila had slid toward me included a proposed figure. $180,000. I looked at it for a long time. The number sat on the page like something obscene. "We felt," Marcus said, with that careful neutralness that people use when they've rehearsed, that the equity structure didn't accurately reflect the division of labor. I was handling business development, investor relations, sales. The technical build was significant, but I built the product, I said. From scratch. Every line of architecture. Of course. And this recognizes that contribution $180,000. It's a clean exit, Mara. You can move on. Maybe start something new. I looked at Paul and Graham. Paul was looking at his phone. Graham was looking out the window at Lake Union. Neither of them was going to help me. They'd been Marcus's investors first. I looked at Sheila, who would not meet my eyes. I looked at Diane, our CFO, who I had hired, whose daughter I'd written a recommendation letter for, and who was currently examining the grain of the conference table with tremendous focus. I closed my laptop. "I need to think about this," I said. "Of course," Marcus said. "Take the weekend." "I'll need more than a weekend." Something shifted in his expression, the first real thing I'd seen from him in that room. "Mara, the deal closes in 30 days. If you're planning to, I'm not planning anything," I said. I need to think. I picked up my bag. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the lobby button and watched the doors close and stood there in that little metal box, and the thing I remember most is that I didn't cry. I'd thought that was the kind of moment where you'd cry. Instead, I felt very clear, the way you feel after a fever breaks, everything slightly bright and strange and real. I pulled out my phone and texted my sister in Portland. Can I come this weekend? She wrote back. What happened? I wrote. I'll explain when I get there. Then I sat in my car in the WeWork parking garage for 45 minutes and I thought, here is what Marcus didn't know about me, or what he knew and decided didn't matter. I am not a person who acts fast. I'm the kind of engineer who reads the documentation before she writes a single line. I test the assumptions. I map the failure modes. I build redundancy into things that other people think are fine. Before I quit Amazon to start Threadline, I spent 3 months building a financial model, a customer persona framework, and a 12-month runway plan. Before I signed any agreement with Marcus, I read everything. Or I thought I had. What I hadn't done was set up document alerts on our corporate filing system. I'd assumed our registered agent would notify me of any material changes. I'd assumed wrong. The amended articles had been filed in Delaware, which Marcus handled. I had trusted him to handle Delaware because we were partners, and partners trust each other with Delaware. That was the error. That weekend in Portland, I sat at my sister Kira's kitchen table with my laptop and 2 legal pads, and I mapped everything I knew. Kira brought me coffee and didn't ask questions yet, which is one of the reasons I love her. The picture that emerged, once I had it laid flat, was not about Delaware. It was about the code. Threadline's core product was a workflow automation tool for enterprise HR teams. The actual engine, the thing that made it fast and flexible, the thing that NovaCorp was paying $34 million for, was an algorithm I'd built 18 months ago that I privately called the Cascade Router. It parsed complex approval chains and found optimization paths that reduced average HR processing time by 62%. That was the number in every sales deck. That was the number Paul and Graham had funded. The Cascade Router was my invention. I had a working prototype timestamped, committed to a private GitHub repo from October of 2 years ago. 3 months before Marcus and I had formally founded Threadline. Which meant it predated our partnership agreement. Which meant it might not be a company asset. Kira finally asked. Is it bad? It depends, I said, on what happens next. She asked what I was going to do. I told her I didn't know yet. That was mostly true. What I didn't tell her, because I was still thinking through it and it felt too fragile to say out loud. The pre-partnership GitHub repo was private, but it wasn't the only place the code existed. I'd submitted an early version of the routing algorithm to an academic preprint server 2 years ago, a technical paper, not for publication, just archiving my thinking under my own name, Mara Lind. If that preprint existed, the algorithm had a public timestamp that predated the company. If that preprint existed, Marcus had built a $34 million acquisition on IP that was potentially still mine. I went to Arxiv at 11:47 p.m. On a Friday night. The paper was there. Dynamic Constraint Cascading in Multi-Node Approval Workflows, Mara Lind, uploaded 27 months ago. I saved it to 3 places. Then I put my head down on Kira's kitchen table and I let myself cry, finally, but not about the money. About the fact that I had trusted someone, and that was the actual thing that had been taken from me. I did not accept the $180,000. I also did not blow up the deal. Not yet. Marcus called me Monday. I told him I was reviewing my options. He was smooth about it, understanding, reasonable, the version of him that had charmed investors and clients for 18 months. I want this to be fair, Mara. If you feel the number needs adjusting, we can talk. I'll be in touch, I said. I called a lawyer that afternoon. Not Sheila Moss, who worked for Marcus. A woman named Patricia Arun at a firm in Belltown who a friend from Amazon had used during a nasty departures dispute 3 years earlier. Patricia had a reputation for IP work. I'd looked her up before I called her, because I always do my research. I told Patricia the whole story. I sent her the preprint paper, the GitHub timestamps, the original partnership agreement, the amended articles of incorporation. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. Walk me through the GitHub repo, she said. I did. She said. And you never transferred this algorithm to the company formally? No IP assignment agreement? I said. There was a general IP assignment when we formed the partnership, anything developed in the scope of the business. But this predated the business. Yes, she said. I need to think about this. But Mara, do not sign anything. I hadn't planned to. I told her that. One more thing, she said. You mentioned Marcus files the Delaware paperwork. Do you have access to the company bank accounts? I said I had view access. Not admin. Check the records. Anything unusual in the last 6 months? I said. Why? She said. Because people who reclassify equity don't usually stop there. I checked that night. It took me 40 minutes of cross-referencing QuickBooks exports. I still had read access because Marcus hadn't thought to remove it against our corporate Amex statement and our revenue records. What I found was a pattern. Small transfers, $8,000 here, $12,000 there, categorized as business development consulting, paid to an LLC called Norwell Group. I'd never heard of Norwell Group. Our partnership agreement required mutual approval for any consulting contract over $5,000. I ran a Delaware business search for Norwell Group. The registered agent was a law firm. The registered address was a mailbox service in Wilmington. I did a broader search. Norwell Group LLC appeared in a litigation record, a small claims case from 2 years ago, unrelated to us, and the plaintiff's filing listed the managing member. Marcus Vale, our CEO, my co-founder. He'd been paying himself through a consulting LLC. $247,000 over 14 months, categorized as business expenses, never disclosed to me, never approved by the partnership. I sat with that for a long time. Then I did something I almost talked myself out of. I opened the SEC's online tip and complaint portal, formerly called the TCR system, tips, complaints, and referrals, and I filed a report. Securities fraud in the context of an acquisition. Undisclosed related party transactions. I attached everything. The Norwell records, the amended articles, the original partnership agreement, the preprint paper, Patricia's preliminary assessment of the IP. The portal told me a case number would be assigned within 10 business days. I closed my laptop and made tea and stood at the window of my apartment in Fremont, watching the Aurora Bridge over the Ship Canal, and I thought, maybe nothing comes of that. Maybe it goes into a pile somewhere and sits there. Maybe Marcus closes the deal and gets his $34 million, and I get $180,000 and spend the next 5 years being angry. Maybe. But he was also about to sell, in a $34 million transaction, software that he might not own. That was a problem that didn't need me to solve it. The thing about people who believe they've already won is they stop being careful. Marcus had, by the time I filed the SEC tip, already sent NovaCorp's acquisition team access to Threadline's technical documentation. This was standard due diligence. NovaCorp's engineering team would review our codebase, our architecture docs, our IP history. I knew this because Marcus had CC'd me on the data room invitation. He'd forgotten I was still on that email thread. Or he hadn't bothered to remove me because he thought I was already contained. I was in the data room. I was not the person he thought I was. I uploaded 2 documents to the data room that night. The first was Patricia's preliminary IP assessment, not the final version, but enough to flag the preprint paper and the ownership question. The second was a clean 2-page summary I wrote myself, dated and signed, laying out the timeline. The algorithm, the preprint, the company formation, the IP assignment, and the questions that raised. I added a cover note. For the attention of NovaCorp legal and technical review team. This document concerns a potential IP ownership question relevant to the core product being acquired. I have been a co-founder of Threadline since its formation and have first-hand knowledge of the product's development history. I sent Patricia a note that I'd done it. She called me in 12 minutes. Mara. I know. That is extremely aggressive. Is it wrong? A pause. No. It is not wrong. But Marcus is going to know it was you. Yes. And the deal may fall apart. If NovaCorp is buying IP they don't have clear title to, the deal should fall apart. She was quiet. Then, okay. I'm filing the IP claim tomorrow. Are you ready for this? I've been ready, I said. I've just been waiting to know what I was ready for. Marcus called me at 7:14 a.m. The next morning, I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 7:31. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail he left the second time was 4 minutes long. He was controlled at the start. By the end, he was not. There was a line in there, and I played it 3 times, where he said, "You don't understand what you're doing. This company, this deal, this is my work. You wrote code. I built a business. There's a difference." I saved the voicemail. I texted Patricia. He left me a voicemail. I'll forward it. There's a useful line around the 3-minute mark. She wrote back, "Don't respond to him. Don't respond to anything." I didn't. The next 10 days were quiet in the way that weather is sometimes quiet before something large. Novacorp's legal team put the deal on hold. This was not announced publicly. I knew because Graham, one of the Meridian Capital investors, called me. He was not warm. He was also not hostile. He was the voice of someone recalculating. "Marcus is saying you're trying to blow up the deal out of spite," Graham said. "Marcus filed amended articles of incorporation while I was out of town," I said, "that reclassified my equity without my knowledge or consent. He was paying himself $247,000 through an undisclosed related party LLC. And the core IP of the product being acquired may not belong to the company. That's not spite. That's material facts." Silence. "Send me the documentation," he said. I sent it. 3 days later, Graham called back. His voice had changed. "We had an independent accountant look at the Norwell transfers. And we had our counsel look at the IP question. And we're requesting Marcus step down as CEO pending resolution." I sat with that. What happens to the deal? That depends on the IP question. Novacorp isn't walking away. But they want the title issue resolved. If your claim holds, he paused. It's a different negotiation. It was a different negotiation. Patricia filed the formal IP claim in Delaware the same day. It would take months to fully litigate, these things always do, but the filing itself was the first public record that the Cascade router's ownership was in dispute. The SEC tip came back to life faster than I expected. I got a call 14 days after filing from an investigator named Reyes, who worked out of the San Francisco field office. He asked me careful questions for 45 minutes. He asked about Norwell Group. He asked about the amended articles. He asked whether I was aware of any representations made to investors about the company's equity structure. I told him everything I knew. He told me he couldn't discuss an active inquiry. I told him I understood. He called back 2 weeks later to ask 3 follow-up questions. One of them was whether I had any documentation of Marcus discussing the equity structure with Paul and Graham prior to the amendments. I did. A Slack thread. From our shared company workspace, which I still had access to because, again, Marcus had forgotten to remove me. I sent it. The acquisition closed 4 months later, in February, on a gray afternoon when the rain was coming off Puget Sound sideways and the Seattle that people warned you about had fully arrived. The terms were different. The Norwell transfers were recharacterized as unauthorized compensation and subject to clawback. The amended articles of incorporation were voided as having been executed without proper board process. There had never been a Real board, just Marcus declaring himself one. My original 34% stake was restored. The IP question resolved in my favor, provisionally, which meant the acquisition price was restructured to include an IP licensing component that ran through an entity I controlled. Patricia had fought hard for that. It added 8 months to the process and approximately $4.1 million to my position. At the closing, I sat in a conference room in Belltown, a real one, at Patricia's firm. And I signed a document that represented more money than I'd ever been able to imagine when I was a 26-year-old associate at Amazon eating $11 salads from the cafeteria on 3rd and sending my mom $200 a month because she was between jobs. Marcus was not at the closing. He'd been removed from the company in November. The SEC investigation was ongoing. Reyes had called me twice more, carefully, telling me nothing, and Marcus had his own lawyers now, expensive ones. Paul and Graham had filed a separate civil action regarding the misrepresentation to investors. The closing attorney, a cheerful woman named Teresa who'd done this 100 times, went through the documents efficiently. When it was over, she said, "Congratulations." I said thank you. I didn't say anything else. The people in that room didn't need to hear anything else from me. Diane, our former CFO, sent me an email 3 weeks after the deal closed. It was 3 paragraphs, and it was essentially an apology, though she never used that word. She said she hadn't known about Norwell. She said she'd been told the equity restructure was legally reviewed and agreed upon. She said she hoped I was well. I read it twice. Then I wrote back, "I know. Good luck." That was all I had for her. My friend Priya, who I'd worked with at Amazon and who had been the one to recommend Patricia Arun, took me to dinner at a restaurant in Capitol Hill the Friday after the closing. Candles, good wine, the kind of place you plan for. She'd been my one real sounding board through the whole thing, texted me at midnight when I was spiraling, listened to me explain Delaware corporate law at lengths no friendship should require. At some point during dinner she said, "Did it feel like what you thought it would?" I thought about the question. "Which part?" "When it was over. The reckoning." I said, "It felt like paperwork. And then it felt like a very good piece of salmon." She laughed. I laughed too. Then I said something that I meant. What I keep thinking about is that I didn't need to do anything clever. I didn't outsmart him. I just told the truth to the right people in the right order. He did everything else himself. His voicemail, Priya said. The Norwell transfers. The Slack messages. He left all of it lying around because he thought I was someone who would take the $180,000 and go away. I took a sip of wine. He didn't think I was the kind of person who reads documentation. Priya said. He didn't know you at all. No, I said. He really didn't. In March, I took 2 weeks off. I rented a small house in Langley on Whidbey Island, 45 minutes from the Mukilteo ferry terminal. I brought my laptop and 2 books and did very little of anything. In the mornings I drank coffee and walked a trail along the bluff and looked at the water. My mother came for 4 days. She didn't fully understand what had happened, the legal details, the equity, the algorithm, but she understood the shape of it, which was, someone tried to take what my daughter built, and my daughter didn't let them. She kept saying, "I'm so proud of you," and I kept saying, "Mom," and she kept saying it anyway. On the last morning in Langley, I sat on the deck in the cold and thought about what I wanted to build next. Not revenge, not a response to anything, just the thing I'd want to make if I had the time and the capital and no one to answer to but myself. I had the time. I had the capital. The rest was just beginning.